and Learn by CAD Dimensions. We put a focus on creating these 30 to 40 minute webinar sessions so that we can basically take a topic and present the ins and outs of that particular topic. And this week we're talking about 3D sketching. Now 3D sketching is one of those tools that's been there for a long time. It's often avoided simply because it is a little different than what we're used to sketching on a 2D plane. However, it does offer some added versatility that can be utilized for many different things. And hopefully today we'll not only shed some light on how you can create and use 3D sketches, but give you also some examples of where it might be utilized within your environment. So kind of the agenda today is, I kind of want to just go over all the ins and outs. What is 2D sketching versus 3D sketching? I know some of you probably are already using 3D sketching in some cases, but maybe breaking it down a little further. How to start a 3D sketch, the actual process of sketching, introduce you to the space handles and how to change planes. And then really the majority of the differences are going to be spent talking about fully defining 3D sketches using dimensions and relations. Then I have 4 or 5 examples of where you might use 3D sketches. So that's kind of where we're going to get started today. So let's hop into SOLIDWORKS real quick. I am on 2016 Service Pack 1. And for those of you who are not on 2016, if I do present a tool that is in a previous release, I will let you know. I don't believe there are any tools that I did that for. So let's just talk fundamentals of 2D versus 3D sketching. When I create a sketch in 2D, I'm limited obviously to the X and Y axis of the plane or planar face that I selected something on. And there's no better way to illustrate what really happens than to convert an edge that is not on that plane. When I take this angled edge here and I convert it, it gets projected onto those 2 axes directly. The reality of it is some sketches, some things that you draw really need the 3-dimensional piece, needs that Z depth as well. So for a 3D sketch, I'll just get rid of this one here, you have that ability. So if I create a 3D sketch and start to convert multiple entities that wouldn't necessarily be on the same plane, all those directions are adhered to. So I got some things going in a Z direction, some things going in X and Y, and I have all 3 preserved directions. And that's really just from a general standpoint a difference between 2D and 3D, as I now have that 3rd dimension. Fundamentally, all of the things that we deal with in a 2D sketch are dealt with in 3D. We still got to sketch it. We still got relations and dimensions and fully defining. The difference is when we get to 3D sketching, we actually have more options for relationships than you would expect to have, some that you may have never heard of before. You'll also notice that some of the tools are grayed out when you're in a 3D sketch. So there are some limitations to which tools can be utilized in 2D versus 3D. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we introduce this. So let's take a step back here. I'm just going to get rid of this model here for a second. Make sure we don't have any questions going yet. Let's start right from the very beginning of creating a 3D sketch. Okay. So brand new part document, units are set to inches. We're used to going to the sketch icon or using my S key to create a sketch. Now you'll notice that throughout the interface it's pretty much littered with only the creation of 2D sketches. So using the shortcuts that we typically use, I would have to customize those, to add 3D sketch to any of these. But the quickest way to show you with the default out of the box is the consolidated menu for Sketch. Under there, you'll find the Insert 3D Sketch command. Now, the great thing is when you insert a 3D sketch, it does not ask you for the plane in which you're drawing on. Why? Because as I just mentioned, you're drawing in all directions, so there is no lock to a specific plane or surface or face. You will also notice that the software does distinguish between a 2D and 3D sketch with the symbol in the feature manager. Again, for your users to understand the differences between them. Everything else from here on is pretty much the same with the exception of relations. Let's start just using my S key to access my line command. Now, as soon as I access my line command, you'll notice that my cursor is a little bit different as we get into the 3D sketch here, in that it tells me the directions that I am able to draw in. Now, when I say able to draw in, it doesn't lock me to a plane, but it does help me to preserve the direction of the lines that I want to draw. And you can see that XY is given there. And you'll notice on the origin, I also have another set of red arrows that we call space handles, which help me to distinguish the directions as well. Now, if I wanted to draw in the Z direction, I cannot do that without making a change at this point. Remember, Z is available, but I still need to tell the software my intent. And this is where I think most users get a little confused with 3D sketching because it's not as obvious how you do it. So I need to draw something in the Z direction. If I hit Tab on my keyboard, that just toggles through the available directions to me. Now, once Z is listed, either first or last in that next to the cursor, I can now draw in Z. As I mouse over the origin, I get the same options as I would have in 2D sketching, where I can actually create a coincident relationship to the origin in this case. And when I go to move my cursor off the space handle, it's kind of hard in this isometric to tell really where I'm going, right? But I do know I can only go in the Z and the Y direction. Y I know is up because of my coordinate system here, and Z is back here. So one of the other things that I mentioned was that in 3D sketching, you have more relations. Now, as I put this off in the Z direction, you'll notice a yellow relation with a Z in it. That yellow relation with the Z is to tell me I am pointing directly in the Z direction. Now, if I just happen to come up here in the Y, you can see one that shows the Y direction. Now, these relationships are unique to 3D sketching. The relationships are called a long Y and a long Z. But again, it helps me to determine the direction that I'm going with this. So my first line is going to come in the Z direction. And just like we had with the 2D sketch, it will chain the second line in that direction as well. So in this case, I want to stay going either in the Z or the Y, but I'm going to go at some weird angle here. And then we're going to come off a little bit more in the Z. You'll notice, again, when you go straight in the Z, you can use the automatic relation of Z to give you the proper direction. Now, this time I want to come off in the X direction. Now, here's a simple issue that most new users to 3D sketching will get in trouble with. Now, it looks like I'm drawing in the X. If I just come over here and because I'm in an isometric view, if I just come over here and click this second point, I'm just going to escape to drop the tool. It really certainly looks like I went in the X direction, but watch what happens when I rotate. Because I was restricted on the directions that I was able to draw that line, it still only drew it on the YZ plane. So it doesn't matter what it looks like. It helps you to see what available options you do have. So what I need to do when I have the line command on is to make sure that the direction that I'm trying to draw is listed next to my cursor. So if I want X, I hit Tab on my keyboard to toggle my space handles and then click the first location of the endpoint of the line. You'll notice that the space handles do move to the location in which you're starting the line, and now I can come off in the X direction. I want to come over in the Z. Now I want to make sure I stay on the ZY plane coming down here, so let me go back to ZY. We'll come down at some angle, and then I'll come off in Z. Now, what I've just done is created, some sort of path that I want to utilize for some feature later on, and I did it all in a single sketch. The next part of this that becomes somewhat of an issue is that we need to restrain this. And that's, I think, probably the second biggest concern for new users of 3D sketching is understanding how to restrain this thing. So it gets a little different. We still add dimensions. So if I knew that this thing was going to be 3 inches, I could go ahead and add the 3-inch dimension. If I knew this was going to be a 145-degree angle, I can go ahead and provide that angle. If I knew the overall height of this thing is going to be, let's say 4 inches, I could do that. But once we get to locking down the rest of the geometry, it gets a little bit harder. I might make this side equal to the other side in length. I might make the endpoints, and this is where it gets different as well. I want to make the endpoints line up in the X direction, so along X. Okay, you can see what I've done there. I might want to make this edge and this edge parallel. So let's just see what I have here. If I start grabbing and dragging, you can see I can drag the length of this thing. I can start to drag the angle here, but look, if I go in a 3D different direction here, I'm actually dragging those entities and angling them, which is absolutely not what I want in this case. So I may have to do something a little bit more to lock that down. So continuing on, let's add a few other dimensions here. We'll make this this 4. Add our height back in. That can be 4. All right. I'm going to move that. It doesn't need to be so big. So 2. All right. But I still need to remove this angle here. You can see that it's still going to be doing some dancing right to left on me. Here's where the use of reference geometry becomes very important. I found that in 3D sketching, reference geometry is probably almost required in most complex 3D sketches to get things locked down properly. So in our case, what I might do is I want to draw a line straight down in the Y direction, because I want to restrict that line from sliding from left to right so I don't get that angle that you're seeing here. And a quick way to do that in a 3D sketch is to make the endpoint of that line and one of my other lines coincident. And that locks that down. Now the last thing I need to lock down in this case is just the length of this edge, which I could certainly put on there as whatever value I want. So I want. Use this here as 4. And now I have a fully defined sketch. So in general, other than the space handles and understanding your direction, certainly the biggest hurdle is going to be adding the directional information. Now, I just did that in an isometric view, which is very confusing to most users. Now, let me take a little different approach and give you a kind of a new way of looking at drawing these 3D sketches. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new part with 3D Sketch. And I'm going to put my first line on here because I know that my first line comes off in the Z direction. If I wanted to help me out, what I can do is go under the window menu in SOLIDWORKS and change the viewport to a 4-view. Now a 4-view viewport allows me to see all 4 views at one time. So now I'm looking at everything. Okay, I'm looking at all angles of what I'm trying to do here. So if I knew that this next line was going to be in that YZ direction, I could go ahead and just go to the view that I want, which has the Y and the Z, and I just go right to that view. Okay, I can put my line on there and draw my angle up in that view. Okay, so I'm still restricted in that viewport to Y and Z, so I can draw the angled line over here. I can easily get the direction of Z, but now I need to go in X. Now if I go down into the different quadrant, this viewport allows me to go in the X and the Z, so now I can come across in the X in this one. Okay. You see what I'm doing? I'm just kind of drawing in all the viewports. So my isometric kind of shows me where I was at. I can come down on my isometric to get my Z here. I can bring the next one down at some angle and then draw the last one off in Z. So in using the multiple viewports, it allows you to get that direction a lot easier. I find this to be the case. You will have to get a little bit used to having the multiple viewports, but it helps to not have to do the tab functionality to make that happen. Now there's a couple of settings, one particular setting that I want to point out here in just a moment, and it relates to arcs. A lot of times when you're trying to restrain a 3D sketch, you're going to deal not only with the arcs and the tangency, but the center points of the arcs. So you're going to want to make sure that in your options, the option for display sketch arc center points is turned on. So that way when you create some sort of arc or radius, that you have the center point to add relations or add reference geometry to. When you're adding radiuses, it's easier to be able to use the sketch fillet command to put the radius in than going and placing the line and adding the tangencies, because this does so much more for you. So if I wanted a sketch fillet on here in different locations, it's much easier to let the software come through and add the radiuses in the 3D sketch that you need, okay, to create that 3D path. Just keep that in mind. I think if you were to use your arc tools, your tangent arc and so on, it becomes a little bit harder to add those relationships. So in this particular case, I drew something that could be used for a path for a swept feature of some sort, where I can quickly and easily create some sort of swept pipe or tube using a 3D sketch with those 3D dimensions. Okay. So there's a few other nuances to 3D sketching that will help us to take it to even another level. And it's going to kind of blur the lines between 3D and 2D sketching. So I want to just take you to another example here. Let's look at this one here. So same type of geometry that I had before. I have a 3D sketch started. I have something drawn in the X direction. Now, I'm presented in this case with a plane that was created ahead of time at that angle in which I drew the line in the previous example. So in 3D sketching, there is a functionality that's going to allow us, let me click off on this so we can see that live. there is functionality that will allow us to move our space handles and lock them to existing planes so that I'm only able to draw in the X and the Y directions of that planes. And that's what I mean by blurring this a little bit, is I'm almost able to create a sketch that's locked to a 2D plane while I'm in a 3D sketch. And to do this, it's very simple. When you have your line command on, if you hold down Control and you select the plane, you'll notice that the space handles now reorient themselves so that they're in the directions of the plane. I can now then draw a line directly horizontal in this case because it thinks it's a 2D plane, directly on that plane. And I can do something very similar to what we did before and draw some lines that meet up. Once I'm done with that plane, what I can do is double click in the graphics area to turn off the plane direction. Notice, let me kind of go through that again. So once I've drawn on that plane, if I turn off the line tool, double click, what it does is it deactivates the plane. And you'll notice that when I deactivate the plane, that the geometry kind of gets grayed out a little bit. So that's basically just showing me that that was not drawn in 3D space. If I want to go back to drawing on that plane, I could double click on it, and now I'm back to really drawing in 2D in a 3D sketch, which is confusing into itself. So once I get out of that, then I can grab my line tool again and draw exactly as we had stated originally, which is the ability to go ahead and use the space handles and the directions to do that. So that has to do with planes that were created ahead of time, okay? So what if I wanted to create my own plane, but I didn't want to exit the 3D sketch to do so? Maybe I need some other angle in here that I don't currently have. What I'm able to do, and you'll notice this on the sketch toolbar, is there's a plane command, a 3D plane command, that allows me to create a plane that exists only inside the 3D sketch. Now, when I invoke this, it looks just like our insert reference geometry plane, right? I can go ahead and select some references. I want a plane that runs through this point, and this point, some weird angle here. You can see what I've just done. What it's doing is creating a plane that I can now draw on in 3D space. So now if I grab my line tool, I can maybe draw some reference lines coming off of each point, and it's now locked on that plane that I just drew. So you can create planes while you're in 3D sketches. And the same thing happens if I double click, it exits out of the plane, and I've now drawn 3 lines coming off of my existing lines that are kind of associated with that plane. Now, if we look at any of those entities that I've just drawn on a 2D plane while in a 3D sketch, if I look at the relationships that exist, you'll notice that the horizontal is based upon how I drew it on the 2D plane, and we're used to this drawing in a 2D plane currently. And the second one is a relationship called on plane. So it actually knows and creates a relationship and locks it to that plane. Well, I could actually draw any entity for that matter and select a plane and a point and create a relationship where I lock a point to a plane. You can see in this case this is the 3D sketch plane. There is auto sizing set automatically for these planes. So the auto size function that we use to auto size planes in 2D sketches works here as well. One thing that if you jump in your 3D sketches that may confuse you if you are working on planes is the fact that the planes only show if your hide show option for 3D sketch planes is on. So if I turn those off, you don't even know that there's planes created in this 3D sketch. You're looking at this thing and you can't even see it. And they don't show up under the feature manager for the 3D sketch. Okay? Now, one other aspect to this, I'm going to go ahead and show a solid body, is that we can go ahead in a 3D sketch and also draw on faces, just like we would opening a 2D sketch. So again, if I wanted to draw in the Z direction here, but now I wanted to draw on the surface of this model or orient it to the surface, if I hold down Control and select the surface, you'll notice that the handles now orient themselves to the surface, and now I can draw on that surface. Maybe I want to come down to the corner here. If I want to switch to a different surface, I can go ahead and hold down Control to switch to the surface and start drawing on that surface as well. So the software, and that didn't quite work out correctly, but the software does allow you to start drawing on other surfaces. Okay, and it just reorients the drag handles so that you are drawing. It's weird. It doesn't want to move for me here, but hold on, Control, select it. Every once in a while you'll get it where it doesn't seem to want to move to a particular plane there. So what I do sometimes is I'll pre-select it, or I'll just jump in and out of the sketch, and that does seem to help it a little bit. But just keep in mind that you can use multiple surfaces of a model. You can use planes from a model, and you can create your own planes when you get into a 3D sketch. Outside of that scope of what I've just shown, the tab key for switching directions, the planes, the relations, the other biggest thing I feel that people question is, how do I use it and when to use it? What instances? And I don't have, a list of 100 different use cases, but I want to give you just some examples of where 3D sketching might be utilized. So you saw this one. Any kind of pipe and tube, if you're not using routing, any kind of bent item that you need some sort of 3D path is absolutely a perfect way to introduce this. The other one is weldments. Weldments is a fantastic use case. In this particular scenario, I'm laying out the welded structure, and I did that with a single 3D sketch that has all the lines drawn with X, Y, and Z directional information, all the dimensions, fully defining, so on. And this will allow me to create a proper frame in 3D space instead of 2D. So much less on the number of sketches needed to do that. If I were to try to do this on 2D sketches, I would need at least one 2D sketch for this side, one for that side, one for the back, one for this middle section. I would need 4 different sketches essentially that are related together. And so it takes a few more sketches to manage, but in this particular case, you can do it a little bit faster. A couple other examples. Let's talk about this one. I think this one's probably the most interesting. So if I take a look at this 3D sketch, it's a much more organic shape. What I have here is a 3D sketch that has a spline on the top and 2 splines on the bottom, and then a couple of triangles closing that in on the end. And these are all controllable and movable points that I can edit and fully define in one 3D sketch. Okay. What I can utilize that for, I'm just going to delete this, is a loft. Now, we've been kind of trained that lofts are, multiple profiles, guide curves, and so on in separate sketches. Well, With 3D sketching, I can severely cut down the amount of work that it takes, or number of sketches it takes to get there. So if I wanted to do a loft on this particular set of sketches, the only difference is I have to use something called the selection manager. So the selection manager allows me to pick pieces of this sketch. Now, the first section is closed loop or open loop. So I want this closed loop as my first section. I want to use the selection manager to say this closed loop is my second section. Now, once I line up my loft handles here, I can then go to the guide curves and say, you know what, I want to use my selection manager again. Now I want an open loop. Here's one guide curve. Selection manager again. We're going to use second guide curve. And selection manager third time. This is my third guide curve. Now, this just makes it a whole lot easier to create a single sketch that has everything you need to loft between multiple profiles. I can have intermediate profiles as well. So if I had some sort of shape in the middle that I want to utilize, I could absolutely do that. But it looks at the, make sure the endpoints are connected and so on, and it gives you the ability to really reduce the number of features that you need to utilize. Another example, and you may have already run into this, but now that we've introduced 3D sketching, this is a good use case as to where you may have run into it already. So what I want to do in this case is I want to add some hole wizard holes into my model. And, I pick the size, whatever that happens to be. Let me make these a little bit bigger in size. And when I go to the Positions tab, we're used to selecting a face in which we want the hole to exist. But there's another part of the sentence here. To create holes on multiple faces, click on 3D Sketch. So now you're initiating a sketch that has all the dimensions, so X, Y, and Z, and we have the ability to draw on multiple planes. So watch this. I can add holes on this plane. I can move one to this plane. Over here, I can go on the front surface if I wanted to. Even more than that, I can create holes that are normal to radial surfaces, all in a single feature because I have a 3D sketch. Okay, you can see those exist on multiple surfaces, and the holes now exist all throughout the model, driven by a single feature. And the reason I bring this up now is it's still driven by a 3D sketch. The difference is going to be when you're in that 3D sketch with the points, now you need to know a way of locking those points in that third dimension, right? So right now it's locked onto that plane, but I have 3 dimensions in which I can move this thing. I could remove the on-plane relation and actually bring that point up off the surface a little bit. Okay, you can see what's happening here, which should cause a little bit of an issue because it won't become attached. Okay, so you do have 3D sketching kind of available to you. Now there's another thing, and this brings up a great point, is when I have something like a point in 3D space, when I'm dragging this thing, I'm dragging it in X, Y, and Z. Okay, you can see I pulled it off, but I pulled it in both directions. Sometimes I just want to move it closer to the surface. Now there's something called Sketcher Triad. Now a Sketcher Triad is turned on through the right click, and what it allows you to do is once you select a point location, the triad helps you to only pull that point in directions that are related to the coordinate system. So if I wanted to pull something in this Z direction, I just grab the triad and drag it. There is a way, if I just right click on the triad, I can move the triad to the selection. I can, see here, I can move it to selection. I can align it with existing edges, but it allows me to restrict the movement or the direction of movement that I have for that point. Okay, so if I wanted to, I don't really have a good edge here, but if I wanted to only move this in the Y, if I select the Y direction, I can now only pull that point in the Y. I don't have to worry about it pulling it vertical in the Z direction. So Sketcher Triad is something that may help you as you get into 3D sketching as well. Let's take a look at other examples that I might have here. Next one I kind of have set up for us. This is kind of a unique example of where 3D sketching could be useful for you. So here I have a very large model. This is a complete power plant. Huge buildings. Let me just give you a perspective on it here if I go to an isometric. So buildings, structures, inside the buildings we have equipment. We have something that represents stairs and so on. But think about it this way, is sometimes you want to just kind of take someone through your product, maybe making a assembly line, you want to kind of walk them around it or give a visual of what they're going to see. Well, here's where 3D sketching might be helpful. There's something in SOLIDWORKS called a walkthrough. And what I've done in this case is I've created a 3D sketch that represents the path I want to walk through my assembly plant. And all I have to do is tell the software under the View menu that I want to add a walkthrough, and I can give it a motion constraint. Now my motion constraint is going to be that path that I created to move up the stairs here. And when I start the walkthrough, it brings up these VCR-like controls that allow me to walk along that 3D path that I created. Now, in order to set myself directly on that path, there's a section in the walkthrough called Constraints. And here I can select the 3D sketch, and now I'm constrained to that sketch. So what I'm doing now is I'm standing on that sketch line. Now, I'm going to zoom myself way out here so you can get an idea of what I'm trying to accomplish here. Sorry for the twists and turns here, but now I'm standing at the very end of that 3D sketch, okay? So I want to take someone through my plant. I'm able to use keys on my keyboard to slowly walk my way along that line. If I wanted to turn to the left, turn to the right, I have controls so I can look both directions. All of this is based upon this line, this 3D sketch that, as I demonstrated, was drawn on multiple surfaces going up the stairs, creating curvature. And you'll see as I start to walk up the stairs, it changes the angle of viewing because of the angle of the stairs. And when I get to the platform, it will turn me around and start walking me up each level of the stairs until I get to the top where I want to walk around some other equipment here. Okay, so as I start to walk around the equipment, it turns me. And again, just following that path. Now, this is kind of a unique tool for 3D sketching, but it's a great way to create a path, a visual around your product so that you can see, what it's going to look like to people. Okay, so I know we kind of talked in general about a lot of the techniques here. At this point, that's all I had for today.
Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and our blog for more great content by clicking on the links in the description below.